Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pediatric Speech Sister Show. I am really thrilled about the panelist that we have today. So, a few weeks ago, I went ahead and met with Rachel live, and we started talking about politics and speech pathology and why it's important. We both agreed that this needed to be a bigger discussion and really just get other perspectives on the topic. So, I'm going to go ahead and introduce who we have today. I'll actually let them introduce themselves. But we do have Rachel Archambault on here. We have Jordyn Carroll and we have AC Goldberg. So, Rachel, if you'll take it away and start with introducing yourself.
Sure. So my name is Rachel Archambault. You said my name perfectly, Melanie. That was so
Thank you.
impressive.
You've been on so many times, I have to get it right.
Thank you. I am a speech language program specialist in Broward County, Florida. I support all of the high schools and non-traditional schools in Broward County. It's the sixth largest school district in the country. It's like 230,000 students. So I support about 100 SLPs. And then I also do Instagram. So I'm known as PTSD-SLP and talk about trauma and politics now and advocacy in the speech field, and trauma-informed care is my area. So that's a little bit about myself.
All right, Jordyn. Yeah, I think so. I think the way we should do it is, Rachel, Jordyn, AC.
See, I didn't know we were all in order.
Like the Brady Bunch.
The screen switch, right? Okay. Well, anyway, I'm Jordyn. I'm Jordyn Carroll. I am a speech language pathologist, and I work virtually in California. I've always been school-based. I also do Instagram, JRC the SLP. I do a lot of advocacy. I started my page to be representation for Black SLPs, because when I was becoming one, I did not know we existed until I got into grad school. So that's why I started my platform, and I've done a lot since then and talk about a variety of things. I'm glad to be here talking to you all now.
Hi, I'm AC Goldberg. I use he, him pronouns. I work as a professor at Northeastern University, and I also do Instagram. I'm transplanting. And I run a nonprofit, the Credit Institute, which is a continuing education platform dedicated to advancing equity in healthcare and higher education. And I'm so excited to be here with y'all.
Amazing. So let's get into it. I am seeing some people join, so please feel free to comment, contribute to the discussion. This is an open discussion, and I'll just put little reminders throughout this whole call. We will try to get to keep this within 30 minutes, no more than 40 minutes. There's really a lot to cover, so we'll just kind of do the basis. So my first question is if each of you could share a personal experience or anecdote that highlights the intersection of politics, diversity, equity, and inclusion in your clinical work.
I mean, I'd be happy to go regarding politics. So I work in the public school system. So as Melanie and I discussed at a previous podcast episode, when we're talking about teacher salaries or SLP salaries, I'm on a teacher salary scale, which has to do with the teachers union. I'm part of the teachers union. There's many states, there's many districts that don't allow union work. My salary is tied to politics because the funding that goes into the public school is determined by the politics here. I'm in South Florida. I'm under a Republican governor who traditionally, Republicans are conservative spending. So within the public school system, we're seeing larger class sizes and things like that. So I see in the public school system the effects of the politics based on the person in charge, the people in charge, the district itself, what the politics are in the school board, the superintendent. It goes a very long way and trickles down all the way to the students eventually, whether that's charter schools, the funding, scholarships available. There's a lot to do with politics, and I didn't realize it until I became affected with my salary specifically, that I had to go advocate at the school board, and I'm giving them the data and they're like, yeah, but we don't want to spend that much, So politics, working in a public school system as an SLP or just SLP in general, they are completely tied together.
Yeah, definitely. I would say for me, I think like a personal anecdote or experience is hard for me because my existence feels political is political. I think to be a Black woman, period, to be an educated Black woman, to be a Black woman in a field that's only 3% Black, like there's a lot that comes from that. And so like, I feel like all of it is political. And just like, I guess from personal experience since undergrad, like I've been policed in ways that others have not been, just based on what I wear, the way my hair looks. I've been told my hair is unprofessional. I've been asked for it to be put in a bun and not to come to the clinic that way anymore. So all of that occurred. I think even just the way that people responded to me in grad school, like, maybe you should try just education, or like telling me I'm verbatim not going to get into grad school when like I met any qualification that was necessary to get into grad school, but they're like, no, this school's not going to accept you. To becoming an SLP and then being an advocate for my Black students and seeing how their language and speech was pathologized, or how people were diagnosed, Black students were diagnosed with behavior disorders when that's really not what was going on. And just a lot of misdiagnosis. And we know that AAE, Black hair, all these things have been policed like since the system was created. And I think specifically speech pathology like lies at the intersection of education and healthcare, and those are for Black Americans and marginalized groups like the scariest places to be. So I think we really have, a duty to acknowledge that and do our best with it.
I mean, I am with you on the, like, my being is politicized. I am transgender, and, I have a very intersectional identity for someone who looks like a white man. And it can be very challenging at times to present factual information to anyone when that information or that topic, not the information itself, has become politicized. For example, I teach a DEI course for master's students. It's required for SLP master's students to have education in DEI topics. It's supposed to be infused throughout the curriculum, and some schools have like a cultural and linguistic diversity or a cultural competency or humility course. Others do not. And I absolutely love teaching this course. This was my second year teaching it. I taught it in the summer. There were almost 70 students enrolled, and of those, there were maybe 5 who had a harder time with the content, and that's relatively few. But the comments that I would get in my like anonymous feedback form, like, how can I accommodate you? Do you have any, is anything going on for you that you need to bring up with me that you don't necessarily want to say out loud or think it might apply to the group? And I got a lot of, like, you're espousing political rhetoric, and I had just given a lecture on health equity. And I think that what happens is, in a climate where there is so much misinformation about what DEI is, and what it means to be transgender, and there's so much misinformation and intentional disinformation about these topics, that when we present facts like Black patients have a lower patient return rate because they report insensitive clinicians, we have facts about these things. But when you present them within the context of like, this is DEI, people are like, that's your opinion. And I got a lot of like, these are your opinions. And it's very hard because overall the experience is incredibly positive, and I love teaching this course. But just the few people who think that in this cohort who think that facts are opinions because the topics have been politicized, it's so damaging. And I don't know how we will continue to move forward as a society if this rhetoric continues and we're told you can't talk about this at work because it's political.
Wow. And thank you. That actually does bring me to my next point, you all, because the reason why I even introduced this topic, I was telling y'all offline, is because when I was teaching a course, say I got the same kickback as AC. Started talking about AAE. I started talking about where AAE came from. I had them do a positionality statement, and that was from the book Cultural Responsiveness and Speech Pathology. They had to do a positionality statement, talk about their political views, talk about how their values and political views influence their decision making. And the feedback I got from that, with, again, anonymous, you don't even have to say who you are, just tell me what you thought about the class. The feedback was, I thought it was completely inappropriate that we had to do that assignment. It didn't make sense what it had to do with the class. Unfortunately, they thought they were signing up for accent modification when I was told I was teaching cultural responsiveness. And so they thought they were just going to pretty much be learning phonetics from, an accent standpoint. And unfortunately, they got me, who's super passionate about this, and will tell them the whole history of everything. So that brings me to my next question then. What would you say is the core argument behind the claim that politics should not be discussed in speech pathology?
I think from my lived experience as a white woman, we were told that politics is inappropriate to talk about. And we are in a field of 97% white people, white women. I think that carries over, that it is a personal topic that you do not discuss, that is part of your identity that you don't share with other people. And I think that's why it's so stigmatized in a way, that it's like, oh, we don't talk about that here, or that everyone kind of is on the same page, because it is a lot of white women that are in this field, that it's not a monolith, but many people feel the same way. So I think that's a combination of what I see. And I definitely had to do some reflection of, why do I feel that, politics is a taboo subject, salary transparency. I think from a lot of my upbringing that those topics are taboo. You should not talk about those things with people. And those are some things that I've had to unlearn. And it's necessary for us to talk about those things, especially in our field.
Yeah, I think, Rachel, I feel like I really value your opinion here, because just like you said, like, our field is majority white women. And so, like, I feel like, you have the inside scoop on what that's like. But I think you're right. And for me, one of the characteristics of white culture is the right to comfort. And I think a lot of white women feel that you cannot make them uncomfortable. You can't disagree with them. That's wrong. Like, it's for them, this is like, it's incorrect for you to do that to them. When it's like, for me, like, I'm just talking about what's going on in the world, like, I'm not trying to like harm you.
Right.
But I feel like a lot of times, like, it can be, for just like you said, when you're raised in a way where it's like, oh, you can't talk, like, it's wrong to discuss. And I'm here, openly just talking about current events. Like, it's going to be perceived very differently.
Absolutely.
For me, that ties into the harmful notion of professionalism. I know that this is passed around in, like, family dynamics also, like, oh, we don't, like, talk about politics with extended family. That culture of silence around, like, personal experiences and trauma and, like, depression and, like, all the things that people, like, condition you not to talk about, like, oh, don't tell anyone about this person in your family who's, autistic. And it's like, but why? And why would I even be talking about someone's neurotype at the dinner table? Like, what are we talking about here? Or, like, don't mention, this person's depression. And it's like, but why? And it's because of that right to comfort. But when we escalate that, like, sort of to the workplace, and then we think about professionalism, like, what are we told? We're told, like, you can basically be, like, completely polite at all times, and you have to be blank. You can't have an opinion. You're there to be like a wall of a conversation partner. Like, I don't really understand, like, not just to your colleagues, but your clients as well. Like, you can be accepting of everyone's viewpoint and respectful and have a disagreement and say things like, I disagree, and just have a conversation about it. But there is something so inherently threatening to the power hierarchy that exists within any institution, to have someone who's empowered enough to say that they're like, whoa, that's unprofessional. And, like, my current workplace is not like that at all. I say I disagree a lot. It's a very healthy dynamic, and I appreciate that very much. But, like, I've been in situations where I absolutely can't say things like that. And I think that we have to start thinking about, all of the structures that are kept in place only to keep things the same for the people who want to keep them the same.
I love that mic drop moment. Thank you, AC. Yes, yes. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the potential consequences, because that was something that, since people who are in the DEI space and who are very passionate about DEI, sometimes it just seems like common knowledge. Like, of course, we should talk about human rights. Of course, we should talk about power imbalances in society. Of course, we should talk about systemic racism, like, right? Of course. But if you aren't conditioned, or if you aren't, what's the word? Because actually the word that I got thrown at me was brainwash, like I was indoctrinating the class. Yeah. So I would like to know you all's
Sorry.
thoughts on, I know, I was like, wow, I laughed as well. I did giggle. I'm like,
At
okay,
least
that's
I didn't
interesting.
get that one.
What are the potential consequences of ignoring political factors in healthcare and speech pathology?
I mean, I feel like if you're not acknowledging the discrepancies between, or just like the inequity of healthcare that is inherently in healthcare and education, then that means you're not doing anything to fight against it. That means that you're, going along with what these inequities are and perpetuating these inequities instead of trying to mitigate them. And I think, for me, the first step to anything is awareness and being able to acknowledge it. And if we're not even like able to say like the facts, then like nothing is going to change. And matter of fact, only going to get worse.
And along those same lines, I mean, I've mentioned that my area of expertise is trauma informed. And the way that my brain works is I actually see trauma informed as the umbrella over DEI, because at the end of the day, if you are not providing trauma informed care, you are actively causing harm. So by not providing or understanding DEI, you are actively causing harm. So I think that is the consequence of not learning, not being ready, that we will cause harm if not acknowledging those factors.
I mean, you and I are on the exact same page about that, Rachel. Hence, some work we're about to do together, which I'm excited about.
Me too.
And that's why I didn't propose a DEI textbook, because I was like, there's a bigger topic here, and that's trauma. I mean, I think that we see, we've seen obviously healthcare inequities that are like this, that have been like this forever. And if the rhetoric that's going on continues, we're gonna watch it widen. We're gonna watch disparities widen for Black people, for trans people, for Indigenous people. I mean, let's think about Indigenous people for just a minute in this short time that we have. Like, they have some of the worst healthcare disparities of any populations in the U.S. And I mean, this is their place, and I mean that has been systemically done to them intentionally since the white
Since
people came
colonization.
here. And when we think about like the government and structures and politics, all governments are going to be inherently oppressive, right? I mean, it's like, choose the form of your oppression, one flavor or the other flavor. It's not, and I think that people who don't see the bigger picture of, like, a government is here to keep structures and systems and power in place because that's in their interest. It's not necessarily in our interest. They're gonna see things as political that are not political, because if we all just acknowledge that the system is intended to harm, then not only are we acknowledging the trauma of everyone who's been harmed by the system, including the people that the original system was completely built to exterminate and exclude, then what we're going to continue seeing are people who just they want to stay out of it, and that's because the system benefits them. But
Yes.
really, they then become the oppressor because they're not willing to have these like pretty simple conversations about scientific facts.
Yep. What is the quote? Silence is choosing the side of the oppressor.
Yes.
I also think it is it is so hard for me to believe that the people who got into this field, like, you have to want to help people. You have to care
Yes.
about people. Like, you have to want people to be okay, and like even like rehab and like do all these things to become better and be their best selves. Like, that's what this field is literally about. So for you to tell me that you're a professional in this field and don't care about the things that are actively going on in the world that are harming the people you claim to care about, like, it just doesn't compute. It doesn't add up for me. So that, I feel like, is one of the consequences, is like, what does that mean for the people that you're serving, like,
Yes.
that you're supposed to be helping?
Thank you for that. Because I actually have two follow-up questions, and I hope that I remember the second one. But to play devil's advocate, it's like, well, why should we care? Why should we care about those gaps that you were mentioning? Why should we care about the oppression? Like, that's kind of just how it's always been. Or actually, is it even a thing as much as you all are saying it is a thing? I think about, for example, with COVID, for example, and, we're looking on the news and we're experiencing loved ones who are passing away. And then we're seeing on the news the legitimate numbers. But then there is a whole other narrative that COVID was constructed for whatever reason, that was a false narrative of what was really happening in the world. So why should we care, y'all? Like, seriously, why does it matter?
I mean, here's a counter thought. Here's a counter thought. People are being fed disinformation, and we know this. I wonder if at a certain point we'll all look back and find elements of disinformation that we were fed. I'm sure that we will, and I acknowledge that that's a fact. But I also acknowledge that there is no arguing with scientific data. And that, that kind of is your I hate to say this word, but that's your trump card. Like, we don't have anything more concrete.
Powerful. Yeah.
There's nothing more concrete.
It's so hard because I also am that person that I look at data so heavily. And I wonder if that's just the nature of our profession, that we went into this profession because we are so data driven, so oriented to that information, that we saw over these past, 4 or 5 years now of COVID, that the scientific data does not matter to many people. The research that is put out there is not taken into account. And that is so hard when our role is based on evidence-based best practice. We are looking at all that information. So that's when politics really plays a part in our role. What is the harm that we have these pseudoscience things in our field that come up every few years, right? And it's like, well, I'm going to do that because I don't care what the research shows. I'm going to do this because I want to do it. And it's your opinion, not scientific fact. So I deeply worry about that in our field. And I think that's just like a small niche area of it. With it, our field is really small. And I think the larger community, when we think of how politics affects our country, our district, our state, we're seeing the same things at bigger levels.
Yeah, I think that's real. And I think now we have seen that people can really choose the wrong person to follow. Like, I definitely understand, like, people are not, like, everybody is not a leader of thought. Everybody is not a thought leader. Everybody is not going to, break down the data and analyze it and come up with the conclusion for themselves. Like, they're going to rely on other people to do that. That's just the fact of life. Everybody's not, going to do that all the time. The issue is that everybody also does not have the discernment to follow the right people who are actually doing that. Like, they're following the same people who are also not analyzing the data, and also not coming to these conclusions for themselves. Like, I think that's what's scary, is that I've personally seen that happen within our field. Yeah. And so that is really scary for what that could lead to, just like you're saying, with, people deciding to do things that are not evidence-based, or not even evidence-based, but like, where did this idea come from, and why is it a good one? Like, let's just have a thought and process that.
I'm really happy that y'all talked about evidence-based practice and data. So that brings me to my next question. How does EBP intersect with political considerations? Anybody?
I thought somebody else was going.
Go ahead, AC.
Go ahead, Rachel.
No, you go.
I don't know. I was going to take it in a direction that I don't like. But I mean, but I can. So we know for a fact that healthcare disparities are real. We know for a fact that trans kids are more suicidal when you don't call them by the right name and pronoun in school. We know for a fact that these DEI bans, these like pronoun bans, these things harm kids. And I think that where I see the largest impact, the largest potential impact for children in terms of all of the political things that are going on, because I know a lot of SLPs work with children. I'm a former school SLP, you two are school SLPs, are book bans. I think that banning representation is something where we have evidence that children who see themselves represented in materials feel more connected and have better outcomes in therapeutic settings, in clinical settings. They have better educational outcomes when they receive an education from someone who looks like them, or even just have access to materials that are about them. We know for a fact that this makes for healthier adults and for people who have like a more positive and balanced understanding of their racial identities. We know these facts, and we're taking this away from a giant group of people. And to me, that's where I feel like I see evidence flying in the face of actual active laws that are being enacted. And I mean, there's not a whole lot we can do aside from remind people to read those books at home and talk about these things at home, and get kids exposure to all sorts of concepts that you may not be able to expose them to at school, because it's important for kids to know about themselves. But like, oh my gosh, I mean, that's where I see like an astounding sort of disconnect between evidence and reality.
I agree with you, AC. And I think it was this question I had to process in terms of an example. Like the words were not computing for me, but like in terms of an example, again, I'm in Florida where book bans exist. In my district alone, my district was being fined for mask wearing, that it became a mask ban during COVID. So that is actually preventing access for our medically fragile children, our immune compromised adults, anyone who wants to wear a mask. It was saying, you don't belong here, you cannot come here. And we work with children who are medically fragile and all that stuff, but this is inherently tied to politics, because it's saying that you can't come to school anymore, you have to pick a different way. Masks are banned here, even though the research is showing that we can help keep people safe. But our district was, nope, we're over it, there's no more COVID, let's move on with our lives. So that could have caused potentially deaths. It could have caused hospitalizations. We have to consider in terms of our clientele, who would be affected by this policy, who is going to be harmed by this policy. And that is something that I don't think they asked themselves, or maybe they did ask themselves and said, don't care, we're moving on. So I think that's every policy that comes out from the government. I go, how does this affect my clients? How does this affect speech and language kids? How does this affect acute care SLPs? I'm always thinking about, where does it affect our field specifically and our clients?
Yeah, I think you guys both answered the question perfectly. I just think I want to reiterate that question of like, who is this harming or who is not considered? And that is not a question that's asked enough. And I feel like 90% of the time that issue is because those people are not in the rooms to ask the questions. No. Which I think brings back, like circles right back to why DEI is important, because if we are not able to include those people in the room, these questions are not getting answered and those people are continuously harmed.
Wow. Wow, y'all. This has been an incredible discussion. Of course, I have a cajillion more questions I could ask you all, but we are almost at the time. My final question for y'all is, what would you say, just any other final thoughts that you have on this topic, DEI, politics, and really how we can create more harmony in this field, even if we have different political views?
I think for me, one thing I want to say is DEI has just become this term like you said, that people are just fearful of, like it's triggering for people. And it's like, it's just thought of just this chunk of letters when like, it's a combination of three different things. The three different things being diversity, equity, and inclusion. None of those are trying to harm anybody. Diversity meaning diversity of race, culture, ethnicity, gender, neurotype, ability, diversity of thought, like diversity of any identity that should be represented as a field, should be respected, and should be shown as like us as professionals as well as the people that we work with, and the materials that we're using with our clients. Equity means individualized support, which is literally what we do in the school system, providing resources and opportunities based on people's needs and nothing else, not based on your opinion, not based on your biases, just based on what that individual person needs. And an inclusion meaning that like we are all intersectional people, we all have different identities, and we need to create an environment where those identities are valued, seen, respected, acknowledged. That's literally it. Like DEI is not a scary thing. It's not harmful. It's just something that means that these are terms that we need to consider. And these terms mean things. Like they're not things that people are just throwing out there. Like they have meaning, and it became a thing for a reason. It's important for a reason. So instead of just, listening to a talking head that says that this is a bad thing, like actually dig deep and figure out what these words mean and how I can apply them to what I do in my life. That's it.
Thank you.
You nailed that, Jordyn. And I was just thinking about the word inclusion in general. Like I'm thinking of my students in the public school, right? That I'm advocating for inclusion. And when you have SLPs that are like fighting for their specific students and they're like, well, not you. You can't be included. Like that's what it feels like in sometimes. So you really have to break it down, maybe from your scope of understanding. Inclusion means including these kids that I service. Who else am I excluding? I think people have to walk it through in terms of some things that they know sometimes, and then they can start branching out. But I think you defined each of the words perfectly. And I think it's up to SLPs to reflect on what is included in each of those words, really understanding the definition of what that means. And they're going to find out it's not a scary thing. It's definitely a weaponized word right now. I hear it all the time. But it's really something to support people and not cause harm, which is our role. No one goes into speech pathology trying to cause harm. We are trying to help. So we need to be understanding of these words a lot more.
And I think that, when we think about trauma-informed, person-centered care, we can't provide that if we don't understand where someone else is coming from and what their lived experiences have been and what factors impact them on the day-to-day that maybe don't impact you as a clinician. And I think about that for anyone who struggles to understand how DEI fits into their practice. It fits into that rapport that you build with your client. It fits into the way that you talk about goal setting, the way that you talk to families, to caregivers, the way that you enter someone's home and how you show respect for their culture. It enters into every interaction that you have. It isn't some abstract, nebulous thing. It's your lens that has to shift. And if you're struggling to do that, really take politics out of it and think about the person in front of you and what it is they need based on who they are and not what you think is right for them, because we got to center the people who are there for our help.
Wow. And right is subjective. What's right for you is not right for everybody.
Absolutely.
Wow, y'all. Thank y'all so much. I am completely I feel very loved that y'all came on here at this time, at this season. We're back to school. Like, this is love. Seriously, thank y'all so much for making this happen. Where can people find you if they want to ask you more questions?
Go ahead, Rachel.
You can find me at PTSD-SLP, and I have a website, www.ptsdslp.com. Those are the main places you can find me, and I've got a bunch of podcast links, and most of them are with Melanie. So lots of interviews with Melanie.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I am JRC _ the SLP on all platforms, including Etsy. Go ahead and check out my shop. Also jrctheslp.com, and I have a lot of different materials and things as well, especially when it comes to like AAE resources, culturally responsive resources. So yeah, check all that out.
And you can find me on Instagram at Transplaining. My nonprofit website is www.thecreditsinstitute.org. You can find CEUs there in DEI topics. There's a Confronting Anti-Black Racism course on the platform featuring two of the wonderful people in this room. It's a really, really, really wonderful course that we want as many people to take as possible. And if you're interested in learning more about gender and you click on my Instagram profile, you can access an entire resource library.
And I do just want to finally say, to everyone listening to this, and if you aren't familiar with the panelists here, they are all leaders in the DEI space and the advocacy space. So if you are wondering how you can get active and what steps you can take, because I've had people come to me, y'all, that are like, I kind of feel awkward. I want to be social justice, but I feel like I don't really have the right to have that platform because I'm non-BIPOC or I'm not from like an oppressed group. These are people who you can definitely follow and completely learn from and feel inspired by. So again, thank y'all so much for coming on the show. And thank you everyone for who is watching live, watching the